I did say that our promise on this program is to make sure that we keep the spotlight on accountability. And this morning, we're hosting the Deputy Director, beg your pardon, of the Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project, SERAP, on the issue of accountability. Everyone knows that SERAP almost on a weekly basis, issues one statement or the other on one issue of accountability that they have noticed. In recent times, they have written to the Central Bank of Nigeria threatening to sue if they do not reveal the details of the allocations meant for local government and publish them, because we do know that sometime last year, the Supreme Court of Nigeria, and it did cause a very huge controversy. People said, oh, it was a new resetting. The Supreme Court judgment that held that local governments be given their allocations directly. Now, it's unclear how that particular judgment has been executed by the executive arm of government. And what SERAP seeks is transparency in this regard. But we're going to ask a little more detail on what had happened prior to now. So joining us right now is the Deputy Director of SERAP, Mr. Kolawole Oluwadare. Mr. Oluwadare, thank you so much for joining us this morning on Sunrise Daily.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always been a pleasure. Good morning.
Well, a lot of excitement was in the air when the Supreme Court, issued that judgment. When the Supreme Court made that judgment, a lot of people were excited, thinking that at long last they're going to see monies trickle down to the local government and see perhaps more action at that local government level with more development and more governance, it will seem, getting directly to the people at the local government level. Would we say that we had our hopes raised for nothing?
Thank you, Mokwe. Not necessarily. The Supreme Court, of course, has been applauded, and we do applaud the Supreme Court for that judgment. But the issues that bedevil the execution of that judgment should not be looked at in isolation. It is the same problem of impunity or the lack of accountability that has made that judgment, as it were, more academic in terms of substance, as it were, today. So Supreme Court has spoken. The least you would expect would be that the parties that should take administrative steps to obey will do so. But unfortunately, because of impunity, which has gone on for too long, that judgment appears to only be laudable on paper as it stands, which is why we are taking that step, at least to clear the air and to get one of the major players, the stakeholders, in enforcing that judgment and to provide information to the Nigerian public, which in this case is the Central Bank of Nigeria. Of course, we've had various information from various stakeholders, including members of the Association of Local Government, complaining about not being allowed to either open accounts or the Supreme Court or the Central Bank not facilitating the payment of those funds. Which is why we wrote to the Central Bank under the Freedom of Information Act to give us clear details. Has there been any funds paid to any of the local government directly? How much is it? And particularly within the context of some of the special considerations we have, circumstances, pardon me, particularly River State, how much has been paid to River State and why? The Central Bank did not respond to that FOI request, which is why we were compelled to go to court. I'm hoping, like I usually say, that shouldn't have been another public interest implication. But of course, because of that same impunity that has gone on for so long, we have to go to court to compel the Central Bank to disclose information on the steps the Central Bank is taking to obey the Supreme Court judgment, and the matter is pending in court as we speak.
So, right now, you try to get information and it would seem that that information was not made available. So, it's not a threat to go to court. You are actually in court. Is that correct?
Yes, we have filed the suit. And the bargain is clear. This is what is a bit painful, because the Central Bank would have to hire lawyers, external counsel, perhaps pay millions of naira to defend this case. To try the background to the case is very important. It's a simple request for information to help government agencies, to help the local government, to help the Central Bank itself, to tell the Nigerian people, this is what we have done, this is what we are doing to obey the judgment of the Supreme Court. The Central Bank has failed, and now time, perhaps 1 or 2 years, money, which the Central Bank will have to pay the National Council, will have to be spent defending the suit. It's so sad, Emma.
Why I find this very strange is because we also had the Attorney General was very involved in this matter. As a matter of fact, it was the Attorney General who took this matter to the Supreme Court. And after judgment was given in favor of what it was that he had requested of the Supreme Court of Nigeria, he went ahead to, we saw, will I say, a rash of elections happening at the local government level. A lot of state government conducting local government, well, they will say it was not them, that it was the CX in their state that became active all of a sudden, and local government chairmen emerging. And they had no problem with the judgment of the Supreme Court. Are we saying that since all of the actions that we have seen, we have no evidence that monies are being paid directly to local government accounts or local government chairmen directly? Is that what we're saying?
Yes, and that is what SERAP is saying. And just to be clear that we are not saying what is wrong, we have asked the central bank to clear the air. The central bank is the major stakeholder, you would understand, in enforcing the judgment of the court. The central bank need not be a party anyway to obey that judgment. Which is why we're written to the CBN to give us clear details. How much has been paid directly to any of the local governments? If not, the central bank should be able to tell us. And tell us also the payments that they made to River State. So as it stands, based on information or lack of it, depending on how you look at it, it would appear that judgment of the Supreme Court is yet to be obeyed. And I want to believe, until the contrary is proved, that none of the 774 local government chairmen councils getting money directly from the CBN. Of course, unless CBN comes out to say the contrary, perhaps during the lifetime of this suit, which we've seen before in some of our public interest advocacy, perhaps the Supreme Court will disclose that during the pendency of this suit and prove us wrong.
Why I find it particularly strange is because the Attorney General was directly involved, and you would think that, he'll do his best to make sure that judgment of the Supreme Court is executed. I've heard him speak at different fora, and I think the last I heard was him warning local government chairmen to remind them that they did not have immunity. That yes, in the case of state governors, they had to wait until the end of their tenures before they could be sued on any issue of accountability. But reminding local government chairmen that they did not have immunity, and that if any malfeasance was noticed, that they could be, taken straight away by the EFCC to court, to account for how it is that they have spent monies that they have received. So to hear that, right now it's unclear as to whether local government chairmen or local government areas have been receiving their monies directly, it's a little disturbing. I don't know, would you say that there is just a bit of uncertainty? What about the Attorney General? Have we been able to speak with him to find out, what he knows about this judgment of the Supreme Court, which ought to be executed?
No, wouldn't know the role the Attorney General has played in enforcing this judgment. But again, this speaks to the issues of lack of accountability and impunity that has gone on for so long. Do we need the Attorney General to take specific steps to compel state governments who were parties to that suit to obey the judgment of court? Does the AG as court need to do anything, the Attorney General of the Federation, to compel statutory bodies like the CBN to take steps to obey the judgment of court? Of course, he need not do anything. But this is unfortunately where we found ourselves, which is why we've had to rely on this kind of advocacy that the organization has provided to make public institutions function the way they ought to. And it's sad in this instance because the Supreme Court is the last court, as you can call it. So is going nowhere after the Supreme Court, unless, of course, you want to take it to the divine. So, if the Supreme Court has spoken, and there is no clarity yet as to whether the local government councils are getting their funds from the central bank, it's just a very good example of how low we have gone in terms of accountability and how impunity actually raised Supreme. So, the victims of this malfeasance are the Nigerian people. And to forget, there was context to that suit itself. There was the social, factual, and economic context to the truth, which has gone on over the years, which has seen the local governments not being autonomous, are not able to provide the benefits of governance to the people in the local governments. So it means that ultimately, it is Nigerians, you and I and the rest of us, that is suffering this impunity that has taken place for so long. And it's very hard to blame one party, as it were. Should we blame the governors? Should we blame the CBN? Should we even blame the AGF for doing nothing? Why we do not need to trade those blames? Each of these parties that are stakeholders, whether they are parties to the suit or not, each of these stakeholders are complicit in not doing enough, doing nothing to ensure that this judgment is obeyed and ultimately making sure that Nigerians get the benefit of government. The AGF has been seen at forums, reminding local government chairmen that of course, they have to be accounting for those funds from their way. The first thing would be to ensure, to use that same strength to ensure that those funds get to local government chairman. And perhaps we'll now need to have that conversation about holding the heads of those councils, the democratically elected chairmen, to account for the monies they've gotten. But now, when we do not even know whether it gets to them directly, that conversation is not right. Ultimately, the people were suffering.
I want to ask if the Ministry of Finance is joined in this. And that's because I know that, in previous administrations, the publishing of, FAC allocations was done by the Ministry of Finance. Do you think that should also be directed there?
FAC allocations go on. That's through the office of the Accountant General of the Federation. If you go to the website of the Accountant General of the Federation, you will see details of FAC payments that happened. I think the one we had is either for March or April. I think the one for March is on the website, and you will see. So FAC allocations are still going on. And the office of the Accountant General of the Ministry of Finance is performing that statutory duty. But what we do not know is that, are we still under the old regime of the amount that should go to local government? Is this still going through the state of what is called under Section 162 of the Constitution, the joint local government and state accounts, or is it going to the local governments directly? What the Accountant General merely publishes the amount that has gone to each of the arms of government, tiers of government, rather, pardon me, not how it has gone to them, which is where the CBN comes to the matter. And it's very also important to highlight that this suit that we filed is the freedom of information request. This is not a suit to enforce the judgment, as it were. Because again, the Supreme Court has ruled there is no other court, as it were. And it's the AGM that should take those steps anyway. But that is why the Attorney General and the Accountant General of the Ministry of Finance is not a party. Which again means that the CBN can come forth with information. He will do it one way. I'm sure the conversation will be having will be different. Because CBN responded to our FY. He said that perhaps out of the 704 local governments, XYZ has gotten these direct allocations. This is the amount we got, or XYZ has opened an account with us. These certain people are. Yeah, it means that we're able to focus on other areas, look at what is still outstanding to make sure that judgment is obeyed on 100%. But this is the CBN, so they just people that might be, because the CBN as well holds the pulse. If the CBN is not forthcoming with this information, they have sharing. It just means we do not. The FAC allocations are being released every month. The Accountant General is doing his part, as it were, but we do not know who gets what, how it is spent. Which means, in summary, we are more or less back to the old regime, where the state governors hold sway in funds.
All right, let me take this to Lagos, because I know that Ayo has always been a great advocate for the local government, and I know that he certainly would not be pleased, that this request has been made and has not been honored. Ayo, over to you.
You're absolutely right, Malkwe. The number one question that I want to ask you, Mr. Luadare, is, in an ideal situation, how should the Supreme Court judgment have been implemented, if you can make that simple for us? Or do you think it's just one of those judgments that is not just as simple as that? Because from what we heard from some ministers previously is that, look, this is not just a cut and dry thing, there's going to be a process to it. Even now we hear that some committee of practice or community of practice is asking for some process, some governance parameters around this whole thing, and it's been almost a year already. What should have been the ideal process for the implementation or enforcement of the Supreme Court judgments?
Thank you very much. And that is why the AG, being the plaintiff as it were in the suit, I believe has thought out all these issues, both legal, the economic, the financial, and the administrative that links all three together. I want to believe that the AG has thought all of these before going to court, because the Supreme Court gives judgment. Of course, there are administrative processes to enforce that judgment. So these perhaps touch on a little issue of law. Does it mean that all the parties that should take steps to obey the judgment must be parties? I do not think so. And does it mean that if they are not parties, they are not bound to obey the Supreme Court? I also do not think so. And so, can be made on both sides to say that there are steps that needs to be taken administratively to obey this judgment. The arguments are neither here nor there. What needs to be demonstrated is the commitment, and perhaps you can call it the political will, of these stakeholders to obey the judgment. Which is why if this was removing a governor that is not in the ruling party, you would, right? First, at least on them would have it doesn't need much in terms of administrative steps to obey it. But perhaps because this touches on, and not directly on some of the players, perhaps maybe one of the reasons why this is yet to be obeyed. So, to both sides of that argument, there has been an argument that has been made, and which perhaps is plausible, that to give full effect to the judgment of the Supreme Court, certain sections of the Constitution needs to be amended, particularly Section 162 of the Constitution, which creates the notion of a joint local government and state account. That, I think that issue was considered, as it were, in the Supreme Court, and there was no direct holding or directive on that point. But all these arguments about administrative steps does not stop the obedience of the judgment. And we've also heard in the public domain that the CBN has mandated and instructed local government councils to open a dedicated account in the central bank. We do not know whether that has been done. I do not know whether the AGF has followed up, or whether he was privy or he approved that administrative from CBN,
perhaps one of the issues
to ensure that that is done. But so
perhaps
we
one
can
of the issues
about what needs to be done. Ultimately, the people need to benefit.
Perhaps one of the challenges here, because we also hear that some governors, as you mentioned, were forbidding some local government chairmen from doing that needful. And we've also heard that even some local government chairmen, I think sometime last year, themselves saying, no, we're not going to, we don't want the local government autonomy, we're with the governor and all of that. So how much of politics do you see at play here? How much of connivance of the local government administrators themselves do you see in this? And who should be calling the governors to account on account of this particular issue?
Thank you very much. I like the way you framed that, and that is why I mentioned the issue of political will. This again is typical of what we've seen in governance in Nigeria, where our practice of democracy favors politics. Nearly 90%, just leaves a mere 10% for the actualities of governance. It's gone on for so long that we can use 1999 as an index, even though it has preceded that. And that is why politics, Nigerians are very politically active and politically aware. But when it comes to issues of governance, it more or less takes, it is not given that much importance. And that's why I've mentioned that what appears to be missing is the political will, starting from the highest office in the land, the office of the president, to get this judgment to be obeyed. And perhaps we might counter that by no political will. Why would the AG go to court in the first place? Perhaps it might also be a political gambit to rein in governors of the state. I am not saying that is, but it could be, and people have said that also in the public domain, that perhaps political gambit ahead of 2027 to rein in the powers and influence of the governor. Those who have said that appear to be right now, given what we've seen. The same zeal and The same zeal we've seen the Attorney General displaying going to court. Have we seen the same zeal in executing this judgment? I do not think so. If that has been done, we will not be having this conversation. Perhaps the conversation we'll be having is how to hold the local government councils accountable. I do not believe that the intention of a local government chairman or chairperson that is with the governor, as you said, and override the judgment of when all state governors or parties. So it's not about whether local government chairmen want to be with their governors or not, which they have the right to do given their political inclinations. But this is a simple matter of governance. Politics is there, but this is majorly issue to governance. So, but again, to summary, the way we have elected politics over time has again comes back to haunt us. Politics is being played at the expense of governance. Ultimately, the people are the victims. I think it's the best way to put it. Like I said, I see the AGM displaying that zeal to enforce this judgment. And so,
Mr. Oluwadare, sorry to interrupt you there. I just wanted to quickly find out. This matter is in court. You have clarified that it is a freedom of information suit. Initially, you had given the CBN 7 days, and they didn't respond within the 7 days. Is that correct?
Yes, there was no response.
How quickly do you think that this matter will be resolved now that it is in court?
Mark, that question is, we please hope and wish that this can be resolved next week or next month or in 2 months or 6 months, as it were. But unfortunately, our experience as lawyers and doing this legal advocacy for 20 years now have shown that the problem that the judiciary has also reared its ugly head in instances of public interest lawsuits like this. This case, unfortunately, can drag for a year or even more. You would think that a case like this should be determined expeditiously, which is also one of the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act that compels the court to determine cases of freedom of information expeditiously. I do hope this gets determined by December.
I do hope so
too. Does not suggest it.
Well, we do hope that that will change in the favor, not just in the favor of SERAP, because you do this on behalf of all Nigerians. So we have to thank you for the work that you do, Mr. Kolawole Oluwadare. So thank you so much for speaking with us on the program this morning, and we'll certainly keep tabs with you to monitor progress on this particular matter. Mr. Kolawole Oluwadare is Deputy Director at SERAP. Thank you once more.
Thank you very much.